Awesome. All right, let's get everything started then. As some of you know, my name's Camille. I've been working here as a beekeeper for about the last 3 years now, so might surprise a couple of you, but I do consider myself to be still very new. So we are getting into hive inspections and problem solving. If you missed my last class that was getting into beekeeping, it is also recorded on YouTube, so you can go and take a look if you missed that. We're getting into the nitty gritty. You should have your packages, your nukes installed at this point, and we're getting into inspecting the hive, when you should inspect the hive, how often you should inspect the hive, how do you talk to other beekeepers about your hive inspections. We're going to be going over what the frames are called, so it'll make it a lot easier to communicate with others. We'll go through a physical inspection. So how do we inspect? What are we looking for when we inspect? And how do we keep all of these things from sticking together to the point where we can't separate them again? What to expect in a healthy hive, what you want to see. That's going to be a pretty short thing. It should be fairly elementary. What you don't expect to see, we're going to go through a little bit later on, and that's more of the heavy stuff. Swarm prevention, that's always part of your hive inspections. Common frame problems, sometimes there's burr comb, sometimes there's old comb or shallow comb. Sometimes you've got a bunch of drone comb, but basically you need to inspect your frames and make sure they're all up to snuff here. We're going to be going over drone comb. And in recent months, drones have become a much larger topic in beekeeping. So we're going to be going over that a little bit as well. Always good to go over seasonal feeding ratios. What you need to know here is if you ask 8 different beekeepers, 8 different questions, you're going to get probably 13 or 14 different answers. So go through my opinions on that. Pest disease recognition and management. There's a lot to cover in this topic, so I'm going to kind of graze over the top of it. And we are going to have a Q&A towards the end. So if you've got any questions, I will field them then, and I will do my best. So why inspect the hive at all? Bees live in trees and nature, and they go without human intervention for sometimes years at a time. In a more civilized structure, you're having so many hives so close together that you are spreading diseases around. You are in an urban area and you're having your hive swarm, which causes problems for your neighbors. There's all sorts of reasons why we do need to keep our hives a little bit more domesticated. The more you inspect, the more you know your bees, the more you know what has changed, what should change, what isn't changing. So get familiar with your bees and you'll know exactly what's going on with them. It's also going to tell you what to do. When you're looking at your hive, you're going to know when to add your honey and brood boxes. You can't just mark this on a calendar and say, oh, it's June 1st, let's add the honey super. Not going to work out very well. You really need to know why you're adding the honey super. And you really need to know when you're adding the honey super. So it does change year to year. Feeding, you should be feeding more or less frequently depending on what is available in nature. Not all the flowers are going to be blowing at the same time. And not all of the pollen is going to be available at the same time. If you're like me, you're probably dying because of grass pollen right now. They're okay on pollen today. Reducing or enlarging the entrances are very important. Most times of year, you should have some kind of entrance reducer in your hive, whether it's a super large entrance reducer, you've got a really high population, a really strong colony, and you need them to be able to get in and out freely. Or maybe you have a smaller colony, or you have a colony that is nearby that is robbing from your hive. You need to reduce the entrance so that only a couple of bees can guard that entrance. Inspections can also tell you when to harvest your honey boxes. Some beekeepers harvest throughout the year. Some beekeepers harvest all at once at the end of the year. So you're going to need to know the state of your frames. If you're doing cut comb honey, this is a little bit more complicated. If you're doing spun honey, usually it's kind of a one and done. But you're looking at your frames, you're seeing when they're capped. If you're doing cut comb honey, you're looking for really brand new, beautiful white wax. So the moment those frames are capped, you're going to pull them out. You're going to harvest them, you're going to put the frames back in so they continue to redraw. The health of the colony and the hive equipment is also important to note during your hive inspections. Sometimes frames break, and if they break and they fall down into the colony, you're going to have quite a bit of a mess to clean up. So there are replacements that you can have. There's little metal replacements for the ears of the frames. You can repair them. It's always good to have a couple extra frames on hand while you're doing your inspections. That way you can easily swap a broken frame for a good frame, or say you have an entire frame of drone, swap that out for a different frame. Just have a couple extra on hand. And every now and then boxes do break too. So it's good to have a couple pieces of extra equipment in the shed. Swap your boxes out, swap your frames out, just anything that needs to be done. It's better to see things as they come up rather than to go into your hive after a month and realize, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So how often do I inspect? It is possible to inspect your hive too often, but it's a lot more likely you won't be inspecting often enough. Inspections too often, particularly when the bees are upset, if you intrude too often, you can cause them to abscond. They'll just fly the coop, every bee just gone. So try not to get in there too often, but you do want to get in there often enough to stop problems as they arise. Temperature should always be above 55 degrees with no rain and minimal wind. The more wind there is, the more probability you have of chilling the brood and angering the bees, and nobody wants angry bees. So I guess you guys have probably all been there. Once every 14 days during proper weather. The reason once every 14 days is mostly swarm prevention in the spring. A queen bee, as you can see in this photo, takes 16 days from egg to hatching. So we inspect every 14 days. If you miss a queen cell, you'll still have a chance to go in and cut that queen cell out. So when bees swarm, it's a natural phenomenon. It usually means that your hive is healthy and it's doing well. A bunch of different reasons, but it will take the old queen bee and about 60% of your population. And not only that, so that 60% of your population doesn't know when they're going to find their next home. So they're going to gorge themselves with all the honey they can fit into their honey stomachs and take all the resources they can and fly the coop. So you're left with 40% of your bees, several daughter queens that are unmated. So it's going to take up to 2 weeks, if all goes well, for your new queen to start laying again. And then you've got a bunch of hatching brood, which is going to help bolster your population. In early spring, swarming is definitely something that can work. You can requeen, let them requeen themselves. Later in the summer, getting into June and July, if you have a swarm, this can be more dangerous. So it's important to stop the swarm, control the swarm. You can do a split as well, which is basically the beekeeper doing an artificial swarm. And then you have 2 hive boxes instead of 1 hive box at that point.
So that top picture is a queen cell. Is that right?
The top picture, this is an uncapped queen cup. So you're looking at the bottom of the frames here. This is empty, so it's not a problem. But whenever I go through and do my hive inspections, I'll do what's called clamshelling. I will lift up my hive box so that I can see the undersides of all the frames all at once. And then I'll just take my hive tool and I'll slit all of the queen cups so they can't be used anymore. That way, if I don't notice that a queen cell is in use, that there's royal jelly in the bottom, I've cut it out anyhow. Queen cells, the queen cup you see in the top photo is different though than a supersedure cell. Supersedure cells aren't going to be on the bottoms of the frames, they're going to be on the sides of the frames. Not always, but usually this happens when a queen has been damaged or has been killed.
I just saw one because I just did an inspection yesterday. It was on the side of the frame, but it was open.
Okay.
Should I worry about that, or is that just kind of like?
If it's on the side of the frame and it's open, this does happen from time to time. It could be an old swarm cell. It could be something that is there just in case of emergency. Every now and then they'll just build them. I usually cut them out, but you can leave it as long as you look at it every single time and make sure there's nothing in it. If you see a supersedure cell like this on the side that looks like someone's taken their thumb and they just kind of mushed it, you're too late. They've hatched. Usually that's a cell that has been culled. So when a hive swarms, they'll lay many queen cells. And then as they emerge, the first emerging queen goes around and kills all the other queens.
So it means they're gonna fly.
Yes.
And is that a drone cell just below and to the left of that, cap supersedure?
Yes, we've got a couple drone cells there.
Yeah.
The brood cells are going to be nice and flat. The drone cells are kind of bubbly and kind of ugly. They're too big. They don't really fit in your standard cell. So when I'm doing my hive inspection, what am I looking for? It's kind of a loaded question. You're looking for a lot of things. You're hoping not to find a lot of things too. You're looking at resource availability. Should always be keeping tabs on what they have. Is their food coming in? Are they consuming food? This is going to tell you whether or not you need to feed. You feed sugar and protein to your colonies. So your sugar, your carbohydrates, your protein is well, your protein, but it's supplemental pollen. So you want to keep supplemental pollen on the hive at all times. If you have a pollen patty on your hive and they're not consuming it, you scrape that away, you put a smaller piece on there, but you can always keep tabs on how much they're eating. And if they can start to eat more, you can put more protein down on the hive. The more access to protein a hive has, the better laying your queen does. So it's really important to keep protein on your hive at all times. As far as the sugar, you only stop your sugar when honey flow is on, because you don't want sugar in your honey.
Where would I put the protein patty? I've been putting it above the brood area.
Okay, so that's a good question. The question was, where would you put the protein patty in relation to a couple of different boxes? The answer is you want to put your protein patty as close to the brood nest as possible. So if you see a frame of eggs, put it directly on top of that. The only place you really don't want to be putting your protein patty is directly in the center of the hive. Try and offset it to the front or the back of the hive, because usually your feeder is right in the center and you don't want to block the feeder. You're looking at hive capacity. Are bees running out of room? How many frames are being worked? How many frames do you still have empty? New boxes may need to be added based on this assessment. Usually we go by the 70% rule. So once your bees are working 70% of frames in a box, you'd add a new box, whether that be a brood box or a honey box. Just make sure they don't run out of room. Busy bees are happy bees, bored bees fly the coop. You're also looking for swarming potential. So are bees creating many queen cells? A couple of queen cells, pretty normal. They want to have a few on hand just in case, particularly in the spring. If you're seeing 20 or 30 of them, you're working on some swarm prevention. Is the population very high for this time of year? If the population is high, you've got so many boxes on, you can't handle it anymore, you may have to do a split. So that's an artificial swarm, and basically means you have one colony that's really strong. Now you have two strong colonies that are smaller and easier to work.
And how do you do that split?
The split is quite a large topic, but there are many different ways of doing it. But the bottom line is you take equal amounts of brood and resources and you split them completely 50-50. So you want a brood box of resources and brood, a brood box of resources and brood. And in the new location, if you can do this, you put the old queen in the new location.
Okay.
That way the bees who know where home is want to go home, but they also want their old queen, so they're more likely to stay in the new box. There is drift that happens when this occurs, so you may have to supplement the new hive with brood from your old hive.
How big of a distance do you need between the two hives?
That's up for debate as well. Mine is about 3 feet away.
Right.
And I get horrible drift every time I split, so I do have to supplement. But I've done a split 2 years in a row now in the same location, and it does work. It requires a little extra work.
Okay.
A lot of people will say if you're going to split your hive, you're going to move your hive 3 miles is best, because then they have no idea where the old hive is and they're more likely to stay. But you don't have to do that. It's going to be a little bit more work. You've got to really keep an eye on them when you're doing your splits.
Hey, I want to go back to the sugar water. Now I got a swarm, a newt the other day. So how long do I feed them with the sugar water?
So getting a new nuke last week,
Yeah.
you're going to want to feed the sugar water basically until you're ready to add that second box and start with honey flow. Because nukes were late this year, you're probably going to have to feed well into the honey flow. You're also going to have to consider mite treatments. So once they branch out into that 6th or 7th frame, then you would treat them with formic acid, is what I normally use. And then you don't feed while you're treating with formic acid. It usually lasts about a week before it dries into a cake.
Take the water out.
Let's see, harvest potential. I think this is where we left off here. You're also looking for harvest potential when you're doing hive inspections. So are honey frames full and capped? If you try and harvest uncapped honey, you're gonna wind up with, well, not very good mead. So you have to have a specific moisture point. Nectar straight from flowers is somewhere from 80% to 90% moisture. We are looking for honey that's somewhere between 18 and 20% moisture. So when the bees stir this honey and fan this honey, they're removing the moisture from it. And as soon as it hits a shelf stable point where it's at 18 to 20% moisture, they'll cap it with wax. And then that's when it's shelf stable and the beekeeper knows they can pull that frame and harvest it. So uncapped honey, not great for consumption. Capped honey is better.
And you normally would never take honey from a brood box. It would only be from a honey super.
Question was, normally you wouldn't take honey from a brood frame, only from a super. And again, there's many different answers to this question. I personally would not take anything from the brood box, just leave that for them. It helps with their organization. It helps with having honey next to the brood. That's not to say that you can't take it, but you have to be incredibly careful. One, not to have a bunch of brood in your honey because that's not very tasty. 2, don't kill your queen when you're taking it. And 3, make sure they have enough resources for themselves. Also, the reason why you have honey supers rather than brood box honey supers, when you lift the box full of honey, a honey super is probably around 60 pounds. It's not too bad. You lift a brood box full of honey, it can be 120 pounds. That's not fun, especially when you're lifting it overhead. Let's see.
So we haven't gone over when we're gonna have the super yet, have we?
No, not yet.
Okay, it's not that.
We're just going over the real basics here. But when you add your honey super, you should be looking for environmental signals. So if you have an overwintered colony, for instance, and they're really strong, you're just waiting for a honey flow to add that super. The big leaf maples are the first major honey flow of the season. So they happen pretty early on. You would add a honey box, then you would take out your big leaf maple honey, harvest that, and then put another box on when the blackberries come out. And the blackberries are the biggest nectar flow of the year. That's what we're all waiting for. They're just starting to bloom right now. But depending on where you are, they may be a little bit behind or a little bit ahead of us.
So I realize that you may not be able to address this because you may not have dealt with the horizontal langstroth hive, which is what I have. Last year, I didn't catch it because it was my first year and they swarmed. And I felt like it was because I hadn't put enough frames in early enough beyond where the queen excluder is, you know, for them to say, hey, you can build up here. This year, I just put them all in. And so far, rather than waiting, but what I'm hearing from you is if I'm in the vertical lane strip, you wait and watch and know and kind of estimate when you should put it on. So am I doing the right thing by going ahead and filling up my whole long?
I don't have much experience with the horizontal hives, but based on what I know about the normal patterns of honeybees, I think it's probably okay to expand a little bit earlier because naturally they want to go upwards. They're thinking about hollowed logs and things, and the bees always want to rise as they build. And they're less likely to want to go horizontally. So the more room you give them, the earlier I think you can actually encourage them to go over.
Okay, well, report back.
Definitely. Not having had any experience with the horizontal hives, it's just conjecture.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. We're also looking for the health of queens, workers, and drones. For queens, you do not have to find the queen. Absolutely not necessary when doing a hive inspection. All you need to know is that she has been there recently So you're looking for good solid brood patterns. She's not laying spotted odd patterns. She's laying a full frame of brood, and you should be able to see as you go from one end of the frame to another, different stages of brood. You'll see eggs, you'll see small larvae, you'll see large larvae, you'll see capped larvae, and then finally you'll see emerging as bees as well. Are you happy with the amount of brood per season? It's always good to note how many frames of brood you have at any one point. In early spring last year, my Carniolan queen was laying, I think she had 12 frames of brood at a time. So she was very productive. She was my favorite queen so far. They don't always lay that much. Sometimes they lay more, sometimes they lay less. But keep an eye on it and see if you're happy with how the queen is laying. Some queens are more productive than others. If you have a weak colony, you don't have a lot of brood for the time of year, you may want to think about requeening if she's not being very productive. As far as worker health, are your workers active and alert? Are you seeing shriveled wings? Look for warning signs when you're in here as well. If you see invaders, moths, beetles, ants in an active colony, this can lead to problems because usually a full size colony, a strong colony, won't allow things like that in the hive. Also look at the color of the brood. It should be pure white. If you're seeing dark larvae, curly larvae, twisted, that can lead to problems too. It's not as common anymore, but it's definitely something to know, the color of the brood. Drone health becoming more important as well. Good visual inspection of drones can tell you a lot about mite infestation, particularly early in the spring. The May edition of American Bee Journal, Zach Lamas is writing an article about how drones can really tell you about mite populations. So definitely a good thing to check out there. If you purchase the digital edition, you will have access to all of the magazine previous, so you can look at that as well. So before you inspect, it's a good idea to just kind of know your frames. Just like the squares of a chessboard, each frame in a hive does have a name. So this frame hierarchy I have listed here is for a 10-frame hive, your standard hive. I guess for the horizontal hive, you probably start with one at the end and go in as well. But because they change so often, I'm not really sure about that.
I put it in the center of what's going to be the brood area.
There we go.
Just by guess.
So if you have an 8-frame hive, the center frames will be 4 and 4. So just remove 5 and 5, squish them together, and it's the same thing. So you have the outside frames are 1 and 1, then we have 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4, and then 10 frame we have 5 and 5. These frames are typically used for specific things. The outer frames sometimes are empty. Usually in an 8-frame hive, they'll be full of resources. In a 10-frame hive, often they're left empty. A little bit more difficult to heat that area and control that area, so they want to stick a little bit closer. Honey and pollen should be in frames 2 and 2. Frames 3 through 5 is generally the brood nest. The bees don't read our textbooks. Every now and then they wedge themselves up against one side or the other, and we can alter that little by little, but it's really important not to disturb the brood nest. So if you're going to move a brood frame, move the entire brood nest over. So preparing to inspect, it's really important to have all the proper tools. And I was actually in the hive grabbing the observation frames out this morning, and I completely forgot to put this in the presentation, but the very first rule about getting into your hive, always go pee first. You will get in there, you will be surprised, and then suddenly you'll be in there for way longer than you expected. So it's really important. I'm not even kidding. Hive inspections should ideally be short and sweet, but they don't always stay as short and sweet as we'd like. It's a good idea to have some kind of a toolbox around. A 5-gallon bucket works great. I have a wooden nuke box that I really like. Just stay organized, have enough space that you can comfortably take things with you. One thing that a lot of beekeepers don't think about, and I'm constantly forgetting mine, bring a little trash bag or trash can or something. You're going to have burr comb, you're going to have little bits of things that you don't need in the hive. And it's important not to leave any debris near the hive that can encourage robbing. So bring a trash bag with you, throw any debris in it, keep that attached to your toolbox in some way. Protective gear, absolutely second most important thing after going to the bathroom. You want your comfort level to be maximized. So if you're comfortable and just a veil, that's fine, go out and just a veil. If you're comfortable, the bees are going to be comfortable more often than not. I swell up like a balloon, so I wear the entire thing. If you've ever been stung in a cuticle before, you'll wear bee gloves. So your hive tool should always be with you. Kind of feels weird, I don't have it in my hand right now, but it should always be in your palm. And as you're doing things in the hive, you can have full range of movement with your hive tool in your hand. So just kind of get used to never having it leave your hand. It's always stuck between your thumb. Your smoker with extra fuel and extra lighters. Can't tell you how many times I've been out there and I've just face palm like, oh, I forgot the extra fuel again. So make sure to bring extra fuel, even if you don't think you'll need it. It's nice to have it around. It's good to light your smoker a couple of minutes before you walk over to the hive. Sometimes air conditions aren't right and the smoker doesn't want to get lit quite right. So take your time, get it lit well, make sure it's smoking, it's not going out. You're not going to be fiddling with it in the hive. You can fiddle with it in the hive, but it's a lot more comfortable to fiddle with it without the veil on.
So you use smoker every time?
Yes, every time. It'll signal the bees, hey, I'm coming in, it's not a bear, there's no attack going on. You smoke the outside of the hive a little bit, just kind of let them know that you're there and you're there to help them. It also blocks their scent, so they can't spread their alarm pheromone. You can only really smell one thing at once, and if your senses are blocked by smoke, you can't smell that nice banana attack scent.
That's why they chase me all over the place. Okay.
And you don't need too much smoke. If you send them into a forest fire, they're not going to appreciate that either. So just enough smoke to allow them to know that you're there. And then you can also use your smoker to control them. So short, quick puffs will move the bees so that you can inspect a certain part of the hive. Notebooks are handy. I don't really mind if I have to throw a sheet of notebook paper away. Really rather not try and get wax off my phone. So notebooks are nice. Bring some extra feed with you. Always have an extra protein patty on hand, whether or not you need it. It's good to have sugar syrup around, but it doesn't stay in solution for more than a week or two. So maybe have the supplies to make your sugar syrup nearby, not too nearby that you have robbing trouble, but keep feed ready to go.
I've heard where some people put sugar water in a little sprayer and spray the top of the hive frames with it to calm the bees. Does that really work?
I have heard that as well. Having a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar to water in a spray bottle to calm the bees. It's not as good as smoke in my opinion, but you can do it. Usually I will do this when I'm doing a package install. I'll spray the outside of the package with a little bit of sugar water or even just regular water. And what that does is it gets the bees' wings wet so they can't fly for a minute. And it also gives them something to do. They're working the water off of their sister's wings. So it keeps them busy, keeps them from flying for a few minutes. It can help, but the smoke I feel is a lot better.
Okay, thanks.
Miscellaneous tools are good to have as well. Not everybody needs a frame perch, but they can be really nice. They give you a little extra space in the hive. Your frame perch, it's a little metal thing that goes on the outside of the hive. You can just kind of set it there. It's got 2 little metal arms and you can set 3 frames on there. You can kind of see it in this picture here. Really handy to have, gives you 3 extra frames worth of room to work in the hive. See if I can swap this over. Inspecting the hive. Before you actually get into the hive, you should be looking at the outside of the hive. So take a look at the entrance and see what you see. You can tell a lot about bee activity and attitude just by looking at the front. Weather is going to greatly affect the mood of the bees. So is it spring? Is it summer? Is it windy? Is it really hot and muggy? You can really tell a lot just by looking at them and seeing what the weather's doing. What you're going to expect when you get into the hive. Like, oh gosh, it's really windy today and it's really hot. Maybe I should go and grab those gloves and an extra veil. Listen to the bees. This is an interesting thing. Just sit there for a second and listen to the pitch of their wings. Depending on their mood, they may sound a little bit different. They'll get a lot louder and a lot higher pitched when they're not in a good mood. Robbing behaviors. Is there anything going on the outside of the hive that really shouldn't be there? Look for fights at the entrance. This will indicate robbing from another hive or from yellow jackets. So if you see little balls of bees in the air falling to the ground in a scuffle, maybe you should reduce your entrance. Maybe you should take a look and see how bad the robbing is. In extreme robbing cases, you can actually use a sprinkler and just set the sprinkler on the hive until the robbing calms down. I've heard of some pretty bad robbing incidents where that's the only thing that'll help.
How do you tell when they're being robbed?
It's pretty obvious when they're being robbed.
Okay.
When you're looking at the entrance, they sound different. There's balls of bees coming in every different direction. It's not the organized bee line you normally see, in and out, in and out. They're coming from every direction. They're looking at any part of the hive that may be available. So if you have ventilation holes in the top of your cover, you'll be seeing bees trying to get in there. They'll be coming from every direction. It's violent when they get robbed.
Okay.
Look for pollen gathering as well. The photo on the top here shows quite a bit of pollen coming in, full pollen baskets. That's always a really good sign. The more pollen is brought in, the less protein patties will be consumed, because the bees do prefer the natural pollen over our artificial protein here.
So if they're not eating the protein, it means they're good.
Usually if they're not eating the protein, it means they're getting it elsewhere, which is a good sign.
Yeah.
So if they're not eating the full patty, reduce the amount you're feeding. So you can still gauge whether or not they're eating what you've given them, but you're not wasting an entire patty that way.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, how long are the patties good?
The patties stay good for quite a while. They're shelf stable for, I have them out for a long time in my insulated garage. And as long as the texture is still good, the scent is still good, and when you put them in the hive, they're being eaten, then they're still fine. In the refrigerator, they'll basically last indefinitely. But if you can throw them in the freezer. But if you put them in the hive and they're not good, no harm done. The bees will just move them. They're pretty good about that kind of thing. They won't eat anything that's bad. They'll usually clean it up for you. Or they'll leave it there and then you'll have to get your hive tool and get this nasty stuff out of there. Every now and then they gotta leave you a little bit. Bearding. This is an interesting phenomenon which startles a lot of newer beekeepers. This happens when large groups of bees gather on the outside of the hive. It looks like your entire colony is on the outside of the hive. What's going on? Natural phenomenon. There's a lot of different reasons this could be happening. Look for orientation of the bearding bees. Are they about ready to swarm? Are they all looking outward, like we're getting ready, we're getting ready? Are they looking inward? They're trying to fan the hive. They've got their wings outstretched, their butts in the air. This picture actually is kind of a trick. So this is when we're fumigating our supers. We're getting ready to do honey harvest. They hate the smell of the fumigation, which smells like cherry Coke to us. Great for beekeepers, not so great for bees. But they hate the smell of the stuff. So they come out and they beard on the front. And then after about 10 minutes, all you do is you take your box, and there's 20, 30 bees left in there. And then you can take it into your warehouse and harvest it. So that's the fastest way of getting the bees out of the colony for honey harvest.
If I'm not fumigating and they're not actually bearding, but I have a lot of bees at the entrance, is that just the natural ebb and flow of we're cooling things down,
Okay, so if you've got a lot of bees on the outside, there's no other phenomena going around. It could be that your entrance is too small and you want some extra bees to be able to get in and out. It could be that it's a warm day and they'd rather be on the outside of the hive. There's also an interesting phenomenon called washboarding. So if you see they're on the outside of the hive, they're equidistant from each other. They're all facing downward. They've got their two front legs up and they've got their antenna up and they're just rocking back and forth, back and forth. That's called washboarding. And they do that usually in later summer.
you know why.
Nobody knows why. It is a constant question in the beekeeping community. So there's a lot of conjecture. Some people think they're bored. Some people think They're washing the outside of the hive. Some people think they are sending off extra scents and pheromones, welcoming their sisters home. Usually this happens late in the year during the nectar dearth. There's not much around, so bees are flying further to get more resources. I think it could also be a defense against robbing. They're scrubbing the hive, making sure there's no evidence, there's no dropped propolis, there's no dropped pollen or nectar or anything that would encourage robbers to enter their hive. But it's all just conjecture, nobody knows for sure. So getting into the meat here, actually inspecting the hive. How do we go about this? What are the techniques? Most important part, and for some reason, a lot of new beekeepers tend to do this. Always work from the back of the side. Don't ever stand right in front of the entrance. So bees, like, they're a little OCD. They come into the hive and out of the hive the same way every single time. You want about a 6-foot flyaway in front of the hive. Don't ever block that. They will bump into you. They'll go, what's going on? What's going on? There's stuff in the way. And then the natural instinct is there's something attacking my hive. And then they'll end up going into a sting response. So just don't stand in front. The side is great. Some people work from the back. I think that's a little bit odd. I prefer to work from the side, but to each his own. Like I said about the 8 different beekeepers. Announce your presence by smoking the entrance. You don't need a ton of smoke here, just 1 or 2 light puffs. Get the smoke rolling, get the bees knowing, oh, hey, there's something going on, but it's not a bear. Or not a skunk.
So I've now done 2 hive inspections where I forgot, because I'm way out in the middle of nowhere. I forgot my lighter and didn't have it in my little bags.
Okay. I do have a little bit of a solution for that. You stick this on your zipper on your suit. You'd have to forget your suit to forget your lighter.
There you go.
It's about $6 for a 10-pack.
Oh, okay.
But I have had the same problem multiple times. I'm not going as far as you are, but I've forgotten my lighter enough times that I finally decided I needed to do something.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't do is I didn't brush bees off. I just thought that might get too wacky because they were full.
Yeah, they dislike being brushed at the best of times,
Yeah.
and smokeless is definitely a time I'd leave my brush in my bag.
I also, and I'm only saying this because you can tell me if it's a yay, you can do it, or no, you can't. I also didn't try to take off anything off the bottom of the frames. I just left things alone and did the best I could with what I had.
Yes, that's definitely a good thing. If you don't have any smoke and you don't have any way of calming them down, it's best to keep everything to a minimum and do only what you really came to do.
Okay.
Let's see, where were we here? Okay, about smoking the entrance. Every time you remove a part of the hive and expose new bees, you're going to want to apply a little bit more smoke. So another 1 or 2 good puffs. All right, we're looking at the honey super. There's a bunch of bees on top. Give them a couple of puffs. They'll go down into the frames and allow you to look at the tops of the frames. They'll know you're there. They'll move the honey frame, the honey box down. New box is available and open. You smoke that one, and then they know you're there as well. So important part about this is bees can be controlled in the hive when they are walking. The moment they leave the ground and they're in the air, smoke's useless. It's not going to help you at all. So smoke them before they start flying. It's always good as a preventative. You can't really use it to control bees in the air. Get to know your smoker. Like I said, the short, quick puffs are good for controlling the movement of the bees, moving them out of locations where you want to inspect. If you want to see some brood and it's covered in bees, a couple quick puffs, and you can see the cells, they'll be completely exposed. You can take a look. Long, slow puffs to keep the smoker going and create steady smoke. Shaking the smoker kind of violently also really helps to keep it lit. So even if you're not using your smoker, just go down and give it a quick couple of puffs once in a while and just keep it going. So inspecting the hive, opening up. This is a very, very sticky process. So there are a couple of techniques to help you not have to use your hive tool as much. It's good to stay organized, keep everything in the exact same order you took it off in. So you're going to set your telescoping top or your lid behind the hive in an easily accessible place. You want to be able to reach it, but you don't want to have your arm over the top of it and be disturbing the bees while you're working. So far enough away that you're not disturbing the equipment, but close enough that you can easily reach. So this is your work area. Not all people have a flat telescoping top. If you have, say, a tiered top, got to set that to the side and find a different workspace. You can use a couple of cinder blocks. You can use a piece of plywood, just as long as it's clean. It's not fun trying to get rocks out of wax. You got to make all the mistakes so that you know. Tell people. So if you as you delve deeper into the hive, make sure to set your equipment skewed on the telescoping top. What this does is this will minimize the surface area touching each piece. So it prevents it from getting as stuck, and it also prevents you from crushing more bees. So the smallest surface area possible. You're basically going to make a bunch of star shapes as you stack your equipment. This can be a bit of a problem in the fall. If you're doing inspections in fall, you have a weaker hive, you have robbing pressure, you need to cover up as you are inspecting. So you move your brood box, you move your honey super. These are open and available. There's a lot of area where robbers can get in. So you can use an old sheet, a pillowcase, maybe an extra telescoping top, and you can set that on top and really minimize the open area to robbers. And by robbers here, I'm talking about other honeybees or yellow jackets in particular. So now you've got your colony open, you've got everything organized. You're not going to have a super sticky mess to pick up later. We're actually observing the bees at this point. So you want to take a look at population size. When you first uncover your hive, before you smoke, you can take a look and just see how many bees are covering the frames. And you can get kind of a good idea of which frames are being worked. If there's a whole bunch of bees all over the frames, like you see in this photo here, it's pretty good chance that whole box is being worked. Not always, but most of the time. Sometimes you only see a couple of frames that are this full of bees, and you know that there's a little bit of work that can be done. Maybe you don't need to add a new box yet. The photo on the left here, this is whiting. This is brand new white wax. They're running out of room and they're trying to build upwards. So this is a good sign that you maybe need to add a new box, or sometimes the bees are just being temperamental. They want to raise up and they don't want to go out. So if you've got some resource frames on the side and they don't want to push out any further, the resource frames they're not as OCD about. Don't touch your brood frames, but you can move your resource frames to the outside and pull in some empty frames to encourage them to continue to work outwards, as long as you're not moving brood.
Would you, before you added another brood box on top of that one, you'd scrape that whiting off there?
Good question. Yes, before I add a new box, I would scrape the whiting off of here, because what the whiting is going to do is it's just going to create a mess. They're going to try and fill those cells, and those cells are not in a good spot. They're going to wind up getting crushed by another box. If you put another box on top of that, bees are working there, you're going to crush the bees. If you try and scrape that off with honey in it, it's going to have robbers all over the place. So scrape it off the moment you see it, when it's still empty and it's easy to clean up. So creating workspace, this is a really important thing, because if you don't have enough workspace, you're going to anger the bees. If you don't have enough workspace, you're going to get things stuck, you're going to thump things, you're going to drop things. So the frames in your hive are close for a reason. You want your movable frames to be movable, so they have to be a certain distance apart so that the bees don't create a bunch of bird comb and propolis in between. But when you go to inspect, you need a little bit of extra room. So you can do a couple of things when you're pulling frames. You can set your number one frame, which is usually an empty frame or a resource frame. Before you set it down, inspect both sides. Every now and then the queen does take a vacation to just a random frame. It actually happened on my last consult, so I was worried. Oh gosh, she's on a frame she shouldn't be on. It's not even drawn. What's she doing? So inspect your frame, even if you know the queen's not on there, because sometimes she is. You can lean the frame up against your brood box. Make sure it's not over the lip of the brood box, because then you're going to end up bumping it. But you can lean it up against your boxes. You can put it in a frame rest, like in the middle photo here, holding 3 frames, gives you quite a bit of extra room there. You can also put it in a quiet box. And this again came from American Bee Journal from last month, different bee inventions. Never knew what to call it, but a quiet box is just an empty brood box that you have next door to your hive. And when you're working your frames, you put a couple frames in there, put your pillowcase over the top. They're nice and calm and quiet in that box. You have room to work in your hive. You're not getting anything dirty. So an extra brood box or an extra nuke can be handy in this case. So moving through frames during inspection. This is where you really need to stay organized. Excuse me. There we go. Sorry about that. So moving through your frames. Where are we here? So you've moved frame number 1, you've set it aside either in your frame perch or against the side of your hive. You have room now to scoot your frames around. You can inspect frame number 2, front and back, set it back, and you're setting it as close as you can to the outside of the box now, and continuing to move frames closer to you as you inspect.
In the same order.
In the same order. So in this case, scooching is not the best option, especially when you have an older hive, you've got a bunch of propolis, you can't really scooch, and that's how you roll bees as well. If you've ever heard of rolling bees, when you slide a frame, you roll over the top of the bees and you squish them, every now and then you get the queen that way too. So it's always good to lift your frames, move them back into position, and then just kind of nudge them with your hive tool. Not good to slide them back and forth. Each brood frame in particular must return to its absolute original position. So if you have 4, 4, 5, and 5 as brood frames, those need to remain 4, 4, and 5, 5. If you have resource frames number 1 and 1 and 2 and 2, you have empty resource frames on number 1 and 1. It's okay to move 1 to 2 to encourage them to fill out that frame. Just don't disturb the brood nest. And this is something that I've been learning more and more. The more I get into this, the more I learn it. No matter how experienced you become, honeybees will always surprise you. The more you think you know, the less you actually know. So always be ready for a surprise. Even though we say the brood nest should be in this location, it's not always in this location. Every now and then the queen does weird stuff and she jumps a frame too. So just because number 3 is a brood frame doesn't mean that number 4 can't for some reason just be full of resources. They do weird stuff sometimes. So you can tell a lot about a frame without even doing a close inspection. Just holding it at arm's length, looking at the color. You can kind of tell what a frame's used for, how long it's been there, what condition it's in, whether or not it should be replaced or continue to be used. So the color of the wax is going to indicate its age and use within the hive. Your brilliant white wax right here, this is brand new. This is exactly how it comes directly from the bees. They have little flakes of wax come off on their abdomen. They pull it to the front, mix it in with some saliva, mold it, and then they put it into the wax cells. When it's brand new, it's pure white. After a while, they walk over the top of it. They've got dirty feet. It turns different colors depending on what they use for it. So this middle one here is kind of yellowish with a little bit white at the top. This is still pretty new wax, but you can tell that dirty feet have been running around with a bunch of pollen on their feet. So there's yellow pollen all over the place. There is nectar at the top. The frame is aging, but it's being used for resources. So it's kind of a golden color. And then the cells over here on the far right, this is definitely the brood nest here. It's a little bit older. It's a little bit darker. Many feet have been trotting over here. And it's probably at the bottom where the entrance is. So even the bees who have to go all the way up the top to get to the honey box, they're walking through here too. So it's a really heavily trafficked area. And when the bees hatch out, they can't completely reach the bottom of the cell. The queen can reach the bottom of the cell because she's long enough. But the worker bees can't clean the very bottom. And so you get little bits of pupal debris at the bottom of the cell, which eventually makes it become a little bit more shallow. After a few years, those cells become too shallow and they can't really be used anymore.
So should you remove those then?
If you have right cell foundation, you can usually scrape these
Yeah.
and then put them back and allow the bees to redraw them. If you have a foundation list, you can cut it out of the foundation and then allow them to redraw it. Or you can just completely replace the frame.
I was reading where if you put in a new frame, straight from the store, for instance, doesn't have any wax on it. Reading where a lot of beekeepers say, take your excess wax and paint it on that surface for the bee.
And that is effective. If you get a brand new frame, most of the frames here are waxed already. There's wax painted on them. But if you've got an old frame and you're replacing it with a new frame, take a little bit of that wax and just kind of rub it over the frame. That'll give the bees a little bit of extra wax to work with. It'll also make it smell like the hive, so they're more likely to accept the frame.
Like that stuff you spray off the top.
Yes, the bird
Right,
comb is
just
great
use
for that.
Okay.
So if I have a reason to need to spray a frame off. And it's old brood frame like that, how is that colony going to react if I want to pull that out and clean it off? Because that's in the brood area where you don't want to disturb.
So if you've got one or two of these really old frames that you would like to recycle, typically if they're old enough that they can't be used, they're going to be just empty frames in the middle of your brood nest. And you can move that to the side. So move that the frame that you want to get rid of to number 1, and they'll eventually completely ignore it and you can just remove the frame. So if it's covered in bees and you don't want to shake the bees, or maybe there's a little bit of brood left on it, move that to the outside of the box, or at least to the outside of the brood nest so that it becomes less used and you can replace it at a later time.
So this is a dumb question, probably. So if you've got one brood box and it's full and you add another, then you add a super on top of all those two eventually.
So your typical setup is you would have your original brood box, and that's where your package or unit could be installed. Once that fills up to 70%, you'd add an additional brood box, wait until that fills up. And usually, at least in this area, beekeepers only deal with 2 brood boxes. And then you would add your honey supers above that.
With an excluder.
Yes, but that's another hot topic. Some beekeepers like queen excluders, some beekeepers do not like queen excluders. I'm kind of in the middle. So I will use queen excluders, but I won't use them right away. Queen excluders will allow workers to go through, but not queens. So you don't wind up with eggs and larvae in your table honey. But it's enough of a resistance that if you put a completely empty undrawn box on top of a queen excluder, it'll just stay empty the whole summer. They won't really care. So what I like to do is if I'm dealing with undrawn frames and I want that to be my honey super, is I'll leave the queen excluder off. I'll add my honey super. I'll wait a week or so because they draw really quickly, especially early in the season. I'll go in and inspect that honey super, and if they've started to draw it out, they're actively working on it, and there's no eggs, because every now and then it does happen that there's eggs up there that quick. Then you'll put your queen excluder in, and they're not just going to abandon their project, they're going to continue working. So essentially what I've done is encourage them to work in the honey super, and then made sure that the queen cannot later on.
And when you say quickly, you mean 1 or 2 days?
Within a week.
Okay.
It takes them a couple of days to really get interested in the new frames, and then once they start drawing, they draw very quickly. So in the outer frames, what you should expect, outer frames 1 and 2, like I said, are resource frames. 1 and 1 are sometimes completely empty, which can be swapped with 2 and 2 to encourage them to draw those. They should be mostly filled with honey and nectar. Sometimes they're mostly filled with pollen, sometimes they're a mix. The honey frames, if you notice, are considerably heavier than pollen or brood frames. So a deep frame of just honey can be about 10 pounds. Versus your brood frame, you lift it out and you almost throw it into the air. So be prepared that your frames are going to be drastically different weights here. These frames can have some brood. Actually, my hive out in the parking lot right now, they've decided that their brood nest needs to be on the side. So very slowly, I'm going to try and work the brood nest back to the center, because usually when that happens, they'll only draw their resource frames out so far. So they stopped somewhere around frame number 3, and frame number 2 and frame number 1 are completely empty on one side, and on the other side, frame number 1 is a resource frame. Frame number 2 begins my brood nest. So I'm slowly moving them back over. Again, bees don't read our books.
So I say, why do you care? I mean, won't they?
Because when the brood nest is on one side, you've got a bunch of brood and maybe a tiny bit of resources on one side, but they end up wanting to just go up and they don't want to fill out the resources on the other side. So if you've got it centered, they're more likely to fill out resources on both sides and have more resources. They kind of get stuck and they don't want to go out. If you have a single brood box and the outer frames are full and being worked, then it's definitely time to add another brood box. If they run out of room, they're going to think they need to swarm. So looking at your intermediate frames, these are really interesting frames because you're going to see everything on these frames. Frames 3 and 4 should be a mix. You're moving from your resources into your brood nest. So this is the outer area of the brood sphere. This should be honey, nectar, and pollen. Typically speaking, depending on where the frame is, as far as brood box number 1 or brood box number 2, they are going to have your brood in this kind of central area, a band of pollen and a band of honey on the outside. This is basically a perfect outer frame right here. And you'll see this isn't queen shotgunning here. This is just bees emerging. So there are a couple of different days in age, but this is a pretty solid brood pattern and they're beginning to hatch here. Your center frame should be mostly, if not completely, brood. There may be some resources on the outer band, and that's okay, but these should be pretty solid frames right here. So this is frames 4 and 4, or if you have a 10 frame, this is frames 4, 4, 5, 5. 8 frames will probably be 3 and 3 as well. So there should be several stages of brood here. You should see eggs, which are difficult to see. If you're looking for eggs, a good trick is to look for the older larva, like on this bottom photo here, and then follow it down to younger larva, younger, and then you'll see the eggs eventually on the outsides here. Tilting your frames into the sun is a really good way of doing it too. If you look through a magnifying glass, sometimes it's hard to focus, but you move it around until you kind of figure it out. Same thing with the frame of brood. You tilt it around until you get just the right angle of the sun, and then you can really see the eggs in there. So obviously cat brood is the oldest. It'll often be speckled with the empty cells you see up top here, where bees have already begun to hatch. But if you're seeing the larva, it should be really solid here. I see 1 or 2 empty cells in this picture, but this is a beautiful brood frame here. And on new wax, which is really helpful. It's difficult to see the eggs, almost impossible on really old wax. Worker stages here. I guess my photo didn't come out as well as I had hoped, but we have eggs here. And if you're seeing the eggs, this is why you don't need to see the queen. The eggs are under 36 hours old, so they hatch at 36 hours. You know she's been here within the last 3 days. The young larva should be fairly easy to see, and the cat brood is pretty easy too.
One of those cells looks like it has 2 larvae in it.
Excellent observation. Yes, one of these cells does have 2 larvae in it, and this isn't a problem. A lot of people think, oh gosh, there's 2, it's laying workers. Not the case. This is a brand new queen that's just been introduced to the hive. She's still kind of getting used to her egg laying, and every now and then she screws up and lays 2 eggs. If you're seeing, is it in the next one? Yes. If you're seeing 6 to 20 eggs per cell, that's laying workers, and that's a big problem. But if you're only seeing 2 in a cell, that's just your queen made a goof. This is a pretty solid pattern. This is the same queen actually that got me the 12 frames of brood at one time. So she was a very productive queen.
Did you name this?
Well, her daughter is Root Beer,
Oh,
but I didn't have a name for her. Queen status. So this is actually my first queen right here. This is the one we were talking about. She's the one that was the extraordinary layer that every now and then made a mistake. Finding the queen herself is super exciting. It's great to have your camera around when you do find her. Just be careful you don't squish her. But it's absolutely not necessary to find her. And when there's a lot of drones in the hive, it's almost impossible to find her. The drones are very different, obviously, but they're just close enough to her size and shape that they'll throw your eye every time. So you're looking for eggs and brood in various stages. If the eggs are seen, like I said, the queen has been there in the last 3 days. If you've got good brood patterning, you know she has excellent sperm. So she's got everything she needs to make a happy, healthy colony. The eggs can be hard to spot. Again, try angling the frames in the sun. This can really help. Having black foundation for white eggs is really nice. Some beekeepers have yellow foundation. This makes it way harder than it needs to be. The foundations, by the way, it doesn't really matter for the bees. It's a beekeeper preference. So I like to have black foundation for my brood nest and yellow foundation for my honey supers. Just looks better that way. The bees are in the dark, they don't really care. Replace your old brood frames every couple of years, probably every 3 or 4 years. Your old brood frames, as I mentioned before, will be dark and they will also be shallow. Having newly drawn brood frames not only makes it easier on your queen and your workers to care for the larva, but it also makes it easier for you to spot the eggs. Sometimes new queens can lay 2 eggs in a cell. Totally okay here. The photo in the corner is of laying workers. I had this a couple of years ago. This is a case where the queen has suffered some kind of an accident and has died. The workers were unable to produce a new queen, so they panicked and they actually began laying. The problem is none of the workers are mated, so they can only lay drones, and they're not really sure how to lay, so they just throw all their eggs in the basket, literally. What you do is when a worker or a queen is heavy enough to lay, they have trouble flying. So you take the frames where you see lots and lots of eggs, and you take them 20 or 30 feet away from the hive, you shake all of the bees off of there. And they can't fly back to the hive, so they'll be out walking somewhere. All of the worker bees who can fly will return to the hive. You can re-queen that hive with a mated queen, and most of the time fix your problem.
In nature, how, when they lose the queen, are they ever successful in laying a new queen?
In nature, it's a death sentence. If they have their queen perish, they don't have any eggs available, they don't catch it soon enough to make an emergency cell, they have no queen, they have no way of gaining a new queen, then they won't make it. So they'll abscond from that area. And once they abscond, it's kind of a mystery what happens. But they won't make it. They'll try to find another nest, but they can't really do much without a queen. So I think they just disperse. But that's definitely something I don't know very much about. So that'd be an interesting hole to dig through.
After the bear ate my bees, one hive, I watched them dwindle. It was very sad.
Oh,
They stayed, those workers did, but they just dwindled.
so you could have gotten to be a queen, like, I know you can buy it.
Mhm.
I guess so, but at
I
that
just
point,
didn't know.
we weren't ready to
Yeah.
protect a new hive.
Yeah,
from
right,
the bear,
right, right,
so
right.
it just-
To make it a little bit
It's
better,
happening again, right?
it won't happen with the entire colony, but several handfuls of individual bees, if they know they're in a doomed colony and they need to leave, if they have enough resources left over, they'll put as much honey as they can into their honey stomachs. They'll find a new colony and they'll beg their way into the colony with what they have in their honey stomachs and become part of that colony. So this happens with some bees, not the entire colony, but it can happen with quite a few. It happens with all the straggler bees, with the nukes and packages, actually. When we have a couple hundred nukes and packages on site, they go home and we have to brush the bees off the outside. They don't really have anywhere to go. So they collect some resources and they wind up in the queen bank. So it helps bolster the population a bit, and then they all get a home. Let's see, where were we? Pattern of brood in stores is important, solid versus scattered. Most queen bees have enough sperm to be productive for somewhere around 3 years, give or take a year or two. New designer queens, probably not going to see these for a while, but some beekeepers have boasted queens that are productive for 6 years. So that's something that may be coming in the next few years, but right now we're looking at queens that are productive for about 3 years. So as you know, your queen is, when your queen is aging, she's going to start running out of sperm. She's only got a certain amount of sperm to lay for the colony. You'll start seeing that brood patterns are kind of spotty. You'll see a larva here, an egg there, and it won't look as good. Usually your colony sees this as well. Your queen, as she runs out of sperm, will also run out of her queen pheromone. She won't be spreading her scent throughout the hive quite as often. And so the bees will begin to make emergency swarm cells. They'll begin to make supersedure cells. They'll prepare for the eventuality of her death or a new queen coming into the colony. That way, if the queen fails, the entire colony doesn't fail. So she'll actually lay her own daughters in preparation for this. Inspect brood frames to prevent swarming, particularly early in spring. Swarming can be a problem for urban beekeepers, can be a problem if you're looking to get honey as well. Colony, 40% of its normal population isn't going to bring as many resources, obviously, but it is a natural process. It means your colony is healthy. When a colony swarms, it will produce many, many virgin queens and queen cups, and it will depart when they're about to hatch. So you'll lose 60% of your colony, a good percent of your resources, and your laying queen when your colony swarms. Your colony doesn't want to swarm if they don't have virgin queens around. So as you're doing your hive inspections, you take all these queen cups and you scrape them off, and then they'll have to start the process all over again. So if you keep up on your hive inspections and your swarm prevention, you can keep a colony that wants to swarm in a box. Doesn't always work, but it can definitely help. This photo here, the swarm cell, if you can kind of tell inside, has some royal jelly in it. So there is an egg in there and it is being fed, and you know that they're getting some ideas here. So you want to scrape that cell off or prepare to do a split yourself here.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's the old queen that goes with the swarm and with roughly 60% of the,
Yes, the old queen leaves.
okay. It is swarming and leaving because it is toward the end of its life, productive life.
Not necessarily. Swarming doesn't always occur when the queen is too old. It can occur when the colony becomes too large. The queen thinks there's a good enough population that she can make 2 entire colonies.
Okay.
So essentially what she's doing is her job is to reproduce for the colony. Well, instead of reproducing individual bees, she's reproducing an entire colony. There are events where if you have your hive swarm, you can have several after swarms as well. So if multiple daughters hatch, and you can have a couple of after swarms. So it's a good idea to prevent swarming or do your split yourself rather than allowing your colony to do its natural thing, because you could definitely end up with some problems, particularly later in the year. If you have a colony swarm in July, you may not have enough time for them to build up enough population, enough resources to overwinter. I mentioned this before, but a couple of empty queen cups is totally normal. Some beekeepers will actually leave the queen cups. During inspections, you know where the queen cup is. You can always look at it. I will get rid of them and go searching, but some beekeepers will intentionally leave some queen cups so that they can inspect them time after time. Just because you leave a queen cup doesn't mean that's the only queen cup that you can check on. You should still clamshell your hive and make sure there are not additional queen cups around.
Clamshell. How specifically do you do that?
So clamshelling a hive, Let's see. So you've got your 2 brood boxes,
Yeah.
half the book and half the book.
Yeah.
And all you do when you clamshell is you lift one box and you set it up like this, so that you can kind of look at the bottoms of the frames. Essentially,
tilting the whole box up.
you're tilting the entire box up so that you can see the bottom of all the frames all at one time. This is a little heavy, so it's good to have a second person. It's also helpful when you tilt it up. If you scoot it to the middle, it's a little lighter weight. I've been playing with this quite a bit lately, and another option, if you don't want to completely clamshell and it's just too heavy, if you don't have handles that are on the outsides of the box, you can lift the box and set it on the ground on its side. And the frames won't move around or anything. You can look at the bottoms of the frames. You can grab the top so that the frames don't move around. You can scrape any fur comb out. It's really handy to have your box just standing up on the ground like this. I actually do it quite often.
And those frames don't relax at the bottom end and crush bees.
Everything's fine. The frames are designed very, very well in regards to bee space. So the 3/8 of an inch rule makes it so not only are the bees not drawing in places they shouldn't be drawing most of the time, it's also making sure that we're not crushing bees while we're doing things like that. It is important that you tilt your hive the proper way though. If you tilt your hive on its side this way, you're going to have problems. Tilt your hive on its side this way, so the frames are all vertical, then nothing moves around. And frame problems. So it's actually pretty common that you'll find at least a frame or 2 that are improperly drawn or damaged. Sometimes the bees don't like the foundation. If you've got that plastic foundation, I know we were talking about rubbing extra wax on it earlier. Every now and then they just don't like the foundation, so they'll draw next to the foundation. Like in this bottom photo here, this is actually real wax, so they should have no problem with it. But every now and then they just do this weird thing where they've got this comb drawn on the side. Not a good thing to have, because when you lift the frames out, you're going to wind up scraping bees, you're going to wind up uncapping honey and creating a huge mess. So get your smoker out, smoke the bees away from the area, and remove that piece of comb. If it's bad enough, replace the entire frame or scrape the whole foundation. But make sure that frame doesn't stay that way.
That in the middle of the brood area, I think it was starting when I got the nuke, which was a couple of weeks, like early May, one of the nukes that I got.
Okay.
What do I do?
So
Because
if
I just kind of left it alone because I didn't want to make a mess. They didn't know what to do.
Definitely. So if you've got a frame that looks like this and it's a productive brood frame, wait a little while, make sure you've got plenty of other brood frames available. Move that brood frame to the outside of the brood nest, allow them to hatch, and then it's on the outside of the brood nest. It's not likely to be laid right away. Make sure as soon as they hatch out, then you remove that frame.
When you're talking about a brood frame, what I think I have to do then is take 2 frames at a time, so I'm not ripping all that apart.
Yes. If they're glued together like that,
Yeah.
you can do your best to kind of move your hive tool through, but if they're that bad, then I think just move them as a group. Let's see. Burr comb. This is a common question for new beekeepers. What is burr comb exactly? And burr comb can be a lot of different things. Burr comb is, a lot of you are gardeners too. What's a weed? It's any plant that a gardener doesn't want. Some people think that, let's see, locust trees are weeds. I love them, but they have a high weed potential. They can get away from you. So some people think of them as weeds. Burr comb is similar to a beekeeper. It's just any wax that the beekeeper doesn't want in a specific area. So wax in the top of your Vivaldi cover. This is really uncommon. I feel like these bees ran out of room in a big way. They very rarely will draw up here, but this is burr comb. You don't want it in there. You want to get rid of it. Burr comb can be on a frame too. So this frame here that you see, it's really wonky up here in the center. They drew their comb, and this is called cross comb. They drew it the incorrect direction. So instead of drawing it along the frame, they've drawn it perpendicular to the frame. So you want to get rid of this as quickly as possible and make sure they draw it in the proper way. This causes all sorts of problems, and as you can see, when I removed this frame, I uncapped quite a bit of honey because it had been left this way for a while. Really interesting phenomenon to see, but you don't want to have it in your hive. You don't have to get rid of burr comb every single time you inspect. If you've got just a little bit of whiting on the tops of your frames, you're in a hurry, it's not the end of the world if you lose some burr comb, but it's easiest to keep on top of it. If it's a nice warm day, it's really easy to scrape it off. Really cold, maybe wait until next inspection. By really cold, I mean like 60 degrees, but really hot, I'm thinking, oh, 90 or something. But then you as the beekeeper are in a hurry because nobody wants heat stroke. It doesn't matter how ventilated your jacket is. 90+ degree weather, you really should keep your visits down to about 10 minutes. So moving on to drone comb. And this is different from the class I taught last year because we've learned so much more about drones in the last couple of months here. Before we were thinking, oh, well, it's just drone comb, get rid of it because it's not really useful to your hive. Not only is drone comb not useful to your hive, it's also really a bad thing for your hive at this point. You do want some drones, obviously, for queen rearing, but it doesn't have to be in your colony. And there's going to be drones hatching out, whether or not you want them to be. A normal colony has about 10 to 15% drones in peak season. So it's not like we're going to be killing the entire population by taking out the drones. They're there, but you want to take out excess drones. Drone comb occurs when bees modify worker cells. So drone comb can appear absolutely anywhere, even in a frame that has been perfect brood for several months. They are wider and they're longer to accommodate the bodies of the male bees or the drones. Once a cell has become a drone cell, it will never again be a worker cell because it's just too big and too misshapen. So if you see drone comb, it's drone comb. It's there to stay. So you would scrape that away. Drones are a problem for your colony because they are varroa mite breeding grounds. As you know, drones take quite a bit longer to hatch. That extra couple of days, it takes a drone 24 days to hatch. A varroa mite can reproduce and have 3 daughters versus 1 daughter on a worker. So it's a substantial difference in mite breeding here, particularly in early spring. In years previous, we have been testing with alcohol or powdered sugar washes to see the levels of varroa mites in spring. We think, oh, well, the mites reproduce best in the drones, but they reproduce everywhere in the hive, right? Turns out in springtime, the mites reproduce so heavily on the drones, they're not even really on the workers at all. So it's important to visually look at the drones in early spring because you're not going to see them in your alcohol washes on your nurse bees. Later in the season, as the drones fade and are kicked out of the hive, your alcohol washes become more accurate because no drones, of course, they're going to be on the worker bees. But for now, in the springtime, the drones are really what we're going to target here. Let's see. Depending on how much drone comb you're removing, you can use your hive tool to scrape away little bits of it. Remembering your tools, you've got a trash bag or a trash can or something that you can transport excess debris out of the colony. Scrape the drone brood into here. Or if you've just got 1 or 2 drone cells, take the edge of your hive tool and go and just dot them out, and the bees will clean those bees out of there for you.
The scrape you want, you just scrape it.
Mhm.
It's not the whole thing.
You can scrape the entire comb, you can scrape just a small section. If you've got a really great brood frame and you've got a little knot of drone in the corner, just take that little knot out and leave the rest of the frame, that's fine. You can control to an extent where your drone brood is laid. So these green frames here actually have an example over there on the table. They have intentionally drawn drone cells. So as the bees put wax down on that frame, the foundation is larger and they will always draw a drone onto those green frames.
Where should you place that?
You place that on the edge of your brood nest,
Okay.
not in the middle of the brood nest, not on the resource area, but right where the eggs stop. And then your queen will go around and go, oh, hey, it's perfect. I was gonna lay some drones. She'll cover the whole thing in drones.
And she'll return to that.
Mhm.
because it's right
Yes.
there.
The really, really important part about this is you have to pull it the moment it gets capped. So set your calendar, set your watch, make sure you go in and you know when these eggs are being laid. If you allow the drones to hatch out, you're just breeding burrow mites. So once the frame is capped, you remove the frame, put a regular frame in, put another drone frame in, whatever you got to do, but you put that drone frame in the freezer for 3 days. That kills your drones, that kills your mites. And beautiful thing about freezing the comb, when you scrape those out, it's not such a mess. If you've ever scraped a drone larva out of a frame when it's not frozen, I don't recommend it. It's just disgusting. So freeze it, scrape it, put it back in the hive. The bees will clean it up and they will begin to lay again. And so you can, it's not a fix-all, but you can control some of your mite populations just with the drone frame. No chemicals or anything in that method, so that's kind of cool. Should definitely be paired with other mite treatments though. Did I miss anything here? Make sure to freeze. Looks like we've got everything.
That if she needs to, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
What was the question?
Well, I was thinking about where that drone frame goes, if I put it way on the outside, so I'm gonna move it. When I move it, will the queen say, well, I don't need to lay drones right now, I think I'll go past this and see what else is there?
That's a good question. So question was, if you have the drone frame next to the brood nest and the queen doesn't feel like laying drones at the moment, will she just pass by? I don't know the answer to that question. So I would have to see. I haven't played with drone frames much. I actually use modified drone frames by accident. So if you don't have a green drone frame, what you can do is you've got your deep brood box, put a Western frame in there, and they'll draw out the Western frame like normal. And all the burr comb on the bottom, when they draw it out, they'll make a deep frame out of that. It'll almost always be drone. So you can make a modified drone frame out of that. And all you have to do, you don't have to freeze it or anything. You take it out, you rip off the entire bottom of the comb, throw it away, put the frame back, there you go. Honestly, I think it's a better idea than getting the drone frames.
Thank you for that.
But in that case, that actually helps with the queen not feeling like laying drones as well. She's got half a frame that she lays regular and a half a frame that she can lay drone or continue to move on.
That's just a shorter.
Yes. Basically a frame for honey super. It wasn't actually my idea. That was American Bee Journal again. So seasonal feeding. I've got a couple of photos up here. Lots of questions always about winter feeding. In the winter, most of the time your bees are clustered and they can't handle the amount of moisture we usually feed our bees in springtime. They can't metabolize the moisture, so they just won't consume it, and it'll contribute to the moisture in the hive. In this area, with how humid and wet it is in our winters, moisture is the thing that kills the bees more often than not. So varroa being the most dangerous factor in beekeeping, moisture is the second most dangerous. In wintertime, you're going to feed dry granulated sugar. You can also feed a fondant and a winter protein patty, which is minimal protein, but lots of extra nutrients. So it gives them the food they need without forcing the queen to lay eggs. Too much protein, too much pollen, your queen has to lay. In wintertime, she wants to have a broodless colony, which means your temperature is going to be different. Normally speaking, your brood nest is somewhere around 93 degrees, and that's midsummer. That's anytime you have brood. When you have a broodless cluster in the wintertime, they don't have to heat the hive as much. So you're looking at probably 83 to 84 degrees in the cluster.
So, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm asking too many questions, but when do I know it's winter? Is it just when consistent temperatures are consistently lower?
Okay, so when do you know it's winter? Temperatures are a good indicator of winter. You can actually see your cluster kind of forming too. Your bees will get tighter. They won't be out on the frames working as much. They'll be, I guess, sort of like a group of penguins. The penguins all cluster together. The warmest area is in the center. That's where your queen is. And then the workers on the outside go in and out and in and out. So that some people get the really cold area, some people get the warmer area. But usually October is when winter really starts to begin, when the rains come. So when you can't inspect as often because it's raining, you can't inspect as often because it's too cold. Below 55 degrees, you really shouldn't be in the hive at all. So you're not doing your normal hive inspections anymore. It's raining, it's getting colder. That's when winter really starts.
I did a stupid thing a couple of years ago and I fed them through the winter with liquid and killed the hives. This year I have left a super, the first super on one of the hives for food.
Mhm.
It's still loaded with honey. Does that work, or due to the coolness of the weather, they're not going up there to feed?
So question being, can you leave a honey super on top of your colony through winter?
Yeah.
Answer is more complicated than you would imagine. I feel like a broken record here. Yes, it's a good idea to leave a honey super on your hive. I almost always leave a super on my hive through winter. Depending on the winter, it could be incredibly beneficial. It could be a complete waste. If it's a really cold winter, they can only really move an inch or two at a time. So if you can't move your cluster, you're consuming all the resources that the cluster has around them, but they can't move.
Yeah.
It's possible, if it gets cold enough, that they can starve to death with a whole box of honey on top.
And how much sugar then, because I'm assuming that I might be able to get into a hive maybe twice in a winter because I'm not near it, so I don't know what day is good.
Last year I got into my hive twice to feed for winter too. It was tough to find good weather.
How much am I going to put on and how do I put on that?
So the granulated sugar with my hives, I try and put it as close to the cluster as possible. I put it just on the tops of the frames like you see in this photo here. After a while, sugar soaks up a bunch of moisture, which can be a good or a bad thing. But consider you're not going to be in there for a while, but it's not going to last forever either. So I fill up the tops, but I don't let too much fall in.
I don't have a Vivaldi feeder. I have to use the slot that goes down.
Oh yes, because the top bars are all together. Now there's an interesting other thing. One of the reasons why I use the Langstroth is because the top bars are a lot harder to feed. It's harder for them to access that. So you would have to probably put a modified feeder in there.
Okay.
Just a shot in the dark. I'm really unfamiliar with top bar hives, but maybe you could make a modified follower board with fondant. So you've got your top bar, you've got a wire casing that would be kind of like the frame, put your fondant in there.
Okay, that makes sense. I can do that.
I'm going to take a quick little intermission right here. Intervene in about 5 minutes. Okay. And I've got lots of resources over here, but I'll be right back. All right, looks like we're back here. Thanks everybody for your patience. So we talked about a little bit of winter feeding. I'm not going to go too much more into detail about winter stuff because we do have an entire class on winterizing going to be taught a little bit later in the year. Fat bees are happy bees, doesn't matter what time of year it is. The only time I actually stop feeding my sugar syrup or sugar feed of any kind is during the honey flow. There's always the possibility that your bees will take the sugar syrup that you give to them for them, and they'll give it to you in your table honey. Sugar syrup doesn't really work as honey. If you've ever tasted your bee food, it's really not the same. The bees appreciate it, they'll eat it, but it's not something that you want to be putting on your toast in the morning.
Neil, do we switch to 2 to 1, like blackberry? Blackberry flowers?
If you ask 8 different beekeepers, you're going to get 3 or 4 different answers on this one at least.
Okay.
So some people will even go as far as to use a 1/2 to a 1 sugar syrup in very, very early spring for surviving colonies. And that just kind of eases them out of winter, and it simulates a very light nectar flow. Like, oh, it's time to wake up. It's time to increase brood rearing. It's time to increase wax production, this sort of thing. And they'll slowly ramp up their sugar ratios. I like to keep it a little bit simple. I do a 1-to-1 throughout early spring. Right before the honey flow, if I'm still feeding them, I will feed them 2-to-1, which is a heavy feed. And that's when I really just want to beef up what they've got in their hive. The 2-to-1 syrup is dense enough that they will actually store it. So don't have this on when your honey super is on, but if you want to beef them up a little bit before putting your honey super on, you just got a package, you just got a new. You don't quite have the resources built up that you think you need before you put your honey super on. Feed some 2-to-1 sugar syrup, and this will help speed things along.
So like right now, it'd be about 20 to 2.
Right now, the blackberries are just starting to bloom.
Yeah.
So if you're not ready to put your honey super on now, you're going to miss a goodly portion of the blackberry season. If you got packages or nukes, you still may be wanting to feed and wanting to bulk up. So you won't really get much honey this year. If you have a surviving colony, this is the time when the honey flow is on. The blackberries are beginning to bloom. You're throwing your honey super on. You're stopping your sugar syrup, but you're keeping on with your protein feed. Your protein stays year round. The pollen patty is about 18% protein, so it's a pretty heavy protein for them. You want that to stimulate brood rearing. So your queen needs to continue brood rearing. She needs to continue pumping out the population, because the foragers have got the hardest job in the entire hive. It wears them out significantly. They don't last very long. They really need replacements in their population. Foragers only last about 6 weeks. So your queen needs to stay pretty busy throughout the season. And then in fall, it's really important, once you take your honey super off, to just feed and get as many resources packed in there before winter as possible. So I feed a pretty heavy 2-to-1 sugar syrup there. It doesn't have to be exact. You can kind of eyeball it. It is possible to have too thick or too thin, but as long as you're roughly within a 1-to-1 or within a 2-to-1 sugar syrup, you're fine. The only thing you really want to watch out for is don't boil it. Mix it with cold water if you can. Mix it with warm water, that's fine, but don't actually boil it, because you'll have a chemical change which basically creates formaldehyde, and that can go the other way. That can kind of poison the bees. So next time you're having a cocktail, think about how sugar syrup becomes formaldehyde when it boils. Pests and diseases. This is not going to be quite as long as the rest of the presentation, but it's a pretty good chunk. So going into the actual problem solving here. Aside from reproductive or structural problems, bees are subject to all sorts of different pests, parasites, fungi, diseases, and it's important to be able to spot when there's a problem in your hive. This photo I got last year, and I couldn't believe I got it. Just right up in the honey super, hanging out with bees, Western yellow jacket. Nobody cares, because these aren't the guard bees. These bees are the foragers. They're busy doing their thing. They're not expecting a yellow jacket in their honey super. What's going on here? So this happened because I was doing an inspection and I didn't throw my towel over quickly enough. So a strong, healthy colony is pretty resilient to most robbers, bee size, of course. It can protect itself pretty well, but as a beekeeper, you want to give them any extra help that you can. So big thing, keep the apiary free of any discarded wax, propolis, honey, spent larvae, anything that you are taking from inside the hive. You should remove from the apiary. Don't leave stuff around, because the scent of everything in the hive being on the outside of the hive is going to draw robbers in, be it wasps or other honeybees or skunks or even bears. So make sure to keep the area clean, particularly in fall, but all times of year. Robbing pests can come in all shapes and sizes. There are things that live in honeybee colonies that aren't really a problem too. A lot of people are really concerned about excess amounts of earwigs, particularly in their inner covers. They just seem to kind of coexist. Earwigs are really not a problem. I've never seen them harm a colony. I've seen plenty of earwigs in colonies. Never seen any harm done by them. Same with thrips. Thrips are basically teeny tiny little grasshoppers. Big problems if you're a rose gardener, but they don't seem to bother the bees. I've seen them in queen cages before. Maybe they eat a little bit here and there, but I've never actually seen any problems caused by them. Large spiders are a problem with the beekeeper though. That's the one thing I can say about the Vivaldi cover that I don't like, is the ventilation holes are just big enough for a giant house spider. Not a fan. I'm cool with 6 legs, but 8 legs is pushing it. So they're not really populous enough to make a dent in the honeybee colony. They're not really going to cause too much of a problem. They might eat a bee or two, but the spider is definitely a beekeeper problem and not a bee problem. Large threats to honeybee hives, western yellow jacket wasps. They are a very big problem, and they're easily characterized not only by their aggressive behavior, but also by the patterning on their backs. As you can see in this picture, there's some very sharp patterns going down the back of this wasp. It's kind of like the ace of spades. So if you see that pattern, you know you're in trouble. They also fly with their wings or with their legs curled up. So you see paper wasps all the time. They're these pretty little wasps with little orange tips on their antennae. They drag their legs. They're not a problem. They're actually vegetarian. But the western yellow jackets will eat larvae. They'll eat honey. They'll eat bees. They'll destroy anything they can.
So you put up the traps, yellow jacket traps?
The yellow jacket traps are basically a waste of time in the fall. But spring is the key. Just think about April Fool's Day. Every April Fool's Day, put out your wasp traps, and you're trying to trap the western yellow jacket queens because they overwinter without a colony, just as queens, dormant queens. They come out, they're foraging around, they're building their nests, they're finding their new sites, they're beginning to raise their colonies, but they're active in April. So put your yellow jacket traps out in April, and every yellow jacket you capture, that's an entire colony. In the fall, it's a drop in the bucket. You're just catching workers.
How close to your hives do you place the?
You don't want it to be too close to the hives, especially if you're getting into the fall, but you want it to be close enough. I'd say probably within 50-60 feet. I think the closest I have a yellow jacket trap to my colony, mostly because I don't have anywhere better to put it, it's probably about 30 feet away. So yellow jacket wasps, we've gone over that a little bit.
So if you've been betting the yellow jacket nest.
That actually brings me to another good point. Yellow jackets can be a little bit difficult to track down as far as their nest, but if you know there's a nest in the area, wait until the sun starts to set and you start seeing some sun shafts going on. You can see their wings at that point in time. Watch for the beeline and see if you can find their nest. Don't get too close. Just call Dan Szilard. But Dan Szilard, he will remove yellow jacket nests basically from, I think it's Portland to Roseburg for free. Just give him a call, send him an email. He's the wasp man in Oregon. Sometimes he gets pretty busy, but he can at least help you out and give you some information. Yeah, for free. He uses the poison, yes. He takes the poison and he uses it for allergy care. So those who are allergic to yellow jackets really like them.
So there's a nest over there.
Actually, I have a nest over there. That's just a queen cup for the friendly wasp. That's the European paper wasp over there.
So the paper wasp has its legs that drag.
Yes, the paper wasp drags its legs.
So if I see that, I don't have to worry.
Mhm.
They're a lot mellower than.
Yes,
yellow jacket.
they're friendly.
And
But
they're all
the-
yellow and black.
Yes. The western yellow jacket doesn't have its nest in a tree or in your barbecue pit or on your eaves. The western yellow jacket nests in the ground. And so you'll just see a teeny little hole in the clay and a whole lot of ruckus. Don't mow over the top. They're not fun. Let's see. Small hive beetles. I have had a couple people in the area. I think there was a gentleman in Albany who had some small hive beetles, but they're very uncommon in this area. It's not a great climate for them. I think it's too cold for them to really take hold. So they're coming up from the California almonds. If you're seeing small hive beetles, they are a problem in a lot of places, but they're not so much something around here. Skunks and bears are a problem that can be a little bit more difficult. In wintertime, we're going to go over this in the winter class. Wax moths, mice, and ants can become a problem. Honeybee hives, turns out, are wonderful ant colony homes too. So it's important to take into account that the ants will move all their larvae into your empty honeybee colony if you've got it dead out in winter. So you need to prepare for that as well. Not a problem with an active colony, but an inactive colony, the ants can be a major problem. What to do if my hive is being robbed by any of these fellows here? Wasps or bees from another colony, your entrance reducer is your best friend. So reduce the main entrance so 1 to 2 bees can easily defend the hive. That's going to make it a lot easier for your colony to defend against them and a lot harder for the attackers to find a way into the hive. So that can really discourage the robbing altogether. Plug any additional entrances. A lot of your honey supers have a small hole in them for an extra entrance to encourage them to go straight into the honey box. Usually it's really easy to plug these because you just got to have a bottle of wine. So the cork fits perfectly.
But we have to drink the whole bottle.
You do have to drink the whole bottle. So after drinking the entire bottle, getting it into the colony can be a little bit more difficult. Maybe wait an hour or so. In extreme cases, sometimes the robbers are just going crazy. There's not too much you can really do. You don't even want to get close to the colony because it's so bad and so aggressive. You'll see knots of bees and wasps and just whatever robbing things are happening, just falling to the ground because they're too heavy to stay in the air with that many insects altogether. This is a pretty extreme case of robbing. Your colony is not really going to be able to fend that off if it's escalated to that point. Use a hose on shower, use a sprinkler, get some water into that area. Sure, the hive's going to get a little bit wet, but it's going to really discourage everybody from flying. And after a while, the robbers will give up and go away. Not a fun scenario, but the water does work. As far as skunks, you probably won't see the actual skunk coming into the colony, mostly nocturnal. But look at the entrance to the hive and remember again, what mood are your bees in? Is it a perfectly calm day? You're hearing the high-pitched, aggressive sound from inside the hive. They're agitated, something's wrong. Look for scratch marks near the entrance of the hive. What skunks do is they'll come up to the hive, they'll scratch the outsides, they'll anger the bees, and they love to eat bees. So they'll just sit there with their mouth open until they get mouthfuls of bees and come back again and again and again. The only way to really deal with this is to capture the skunk, move it away in some fashion. You can try to ward it off. The nail board was amazing. You're never supposed to go in front of your hive anyway, so put a board full of nails in front of the hive so they can't really walk there.
Those carpet strips.
Carpet strips. You can use motion sensing light as well. I've seen these for critters at night. It's just a red LED light and it pops on and flashes when something activates the motion sensor. It'll trick the skunk into thinking, oh, there's a predator watching me, and it'll take off. Never actually used these myself, but I've heard that they work well. I've got a question in chat. Should the entrance reducer be left on during the summer? On hot days, I've been removing mine. That's actually a really good question. And it depends on several factors. If you have a really strong colony, it's really hot, you should put your entrance reducer on large or even remove the entrance reducer altogether. That allows the bees to go in and out and more easily fan the hive and cool the hive. If you have a weaker colony and it's being robbed, robbing is the biggest thing. Leave your entrance reducer on small if you're having robbing activity, but if you've got a strong colony, it's better to leave it ventilated and let them do their thing. Bears. Fortunately, I don't have any personal experience with bears either. Hot wire can deter a bear if the shock hits him in the nose. But basically the bottom line is the bear wins. If a bear wants the hive, it's gonna get the hive. There's not really too much you can do about that. On to diseases. There are some indicator diseases which will lead you to different things. So it's always a good idea to look at just visually look at the bees for deformed wing virus. It's really easy to see. Usually deformed wing virus is passed on by varroa mites. Not always, but usually. When you see really bad deformed wing virus, you'll see the workers will actually kick out the infected bees, and they'll be all along the front of the hive near the entrance. They can't fly, so they're just kind of walking around. So check the entrance and see if you've got any walking. Tracheal mites can also be a cause of deformed wing virus, but can be treated the same way varroa mites are. So tracheal mites are kind of a thing of the past because of our modern day treatments.
What do you do with deformed wing virus?
There's not too much you can do with deformed wing virus other than treat for mites and hope that they brood out of it. So you're waiting for your healthy queen to raise healthy new larvae. The bees with deformed wing virus are past saving, so they're gonna die. But maybe they passed through the honey super on their way out. Some diseases can be treated with chemical or cultural controls or some combination thereof. Others are quite a bit more devastating and require the disposal or incineration of infected equipment. American foul brood is basically the worst. You can use equipment after American foul brood. You just have to incinerate it first. You would throw away all the frames. You would put, you would dig a big pit, light a fire in the pit, wait until it cools a bit. And then you would set all of your boxes in there, make sure to sear all the insides of the boxes, and then the boxes can still be used. But spores from American foul brood can last, I think it's something around 80 years. It's basically bee cancer. As with many organisms, stress colonies are much more subject to infection. So prevention and upkeep of colony health is the best way to deal with these things. So we've got an example of chalk brood here. Honestly, this isn't the best example I could give you of chalk brood. The easiest way to identify chalk brood is by looking at the entrance before you even get into the colony. The bees, as they age, will go through different jobs. So a brand new baby bee, the very first job it has is cleaning out its own cell. And then it's going to become a nurse bee. It's going to feed the larva. It's going to take care of the queen. It'll become a mortician bee. There's a natural die-off. Every 6 weeks, your summer bees are going to die. Every 3 months, your winter bees are going to die. The mortician bee's job is to take dead bees from the colony and kick them out the entrance, essentially cleaning the dead from the colony. With chalk brood, the brood becomes kind of this chalky mummy, and you'll be able to see the chalky mummies outside the entrance as the mortician bees have dumped them out.
Is there anything else that looks like chalk brood that's not chalk brood?
Kind of, but not really. Chalk brood is pretty easy to identify. If you're seeing things that look like chalk brood, maybe if you're looking at this photo here and you see something similar, old frames with just moldy coverings kind of look like this, but you're not going to see, like, it's a little bit different. You'd be able to tell like a mummified bee versus a moldy frame of pollen. This is inside an active colony.
Yeah, I just saw something that looked like that in mine, so.
Okay. Hygienic queens can pull through this kind of thing. Extra ventilation is helpful. If you see chalk brood, make sure you're feeding well. Supplemental feed can help as well. So if you're feeding a honeybee healthy, or I think it's Pro Health as a supplement to your sugar feed, that can also help. But having a hygienic queen is incredibly important. If the problem persists after all these other things are happening, requeen, and then she can pull it out.
But it doesn't matter to leave that, just ignore that, but try to treat to make it go away
Mhm.
for,
They'll clean it up.
all right.
So brood diseases, as you can see here, are pretty easy to identify. Adult diseases can be a little bit more difficult. Brood, it's right there in your face. You can look at the brood. The adult diseases like dysentery and nosema can go under the radar until it's too late. I think we've got nosema coming up right here, after the foul brood. So American foul brood is the worst of the worst. Foul broods, both European and American, smell terrible. American foul brood apparently smells quite a bit worse though. The American foul brood can easily be identified versus the European foul brood by what's called the ropey test. You take a toothpick and you take your brood frame and you stir the larva up. It's kind of gross, but it's American foul brood. So when you remove that toothpick, you should be able to stretch the stirred larva at least an inch. And if it's that sticky, you're pulling out an inch of stirred up larva, it's American foul brood. European foul brood can be cleaned by the bees and can actually be remedied just by requeening. But American foul brood, not only is it more destructive, it's also difficult for the bees to clean. And so it just sticks around.
Back in the, I think the 60s or 50s, the American Army developed foul brood that can infect people.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yay.
That's a fun one. Foul brood to affect you.
That's helpful.
I need to look into that.
You know, this part of it work.
But what I'm hearing you say though is that the queen carries the foul brood into that's where.
The foul brood spreads from touch. So it spreads from larva to larva, from worker to worker, and so on and so forth.
But when you said you can correct for European by requeening, that tells me that the queen is the one that carries it into
The hygienic properties of the queen.
Ah,
So the queen lays her eggs and she sends certain behavioral traits through her eggs. So she may have a population of workers who are crazy about cleaning. Mite biters is a really good example of this. Mite biters, the queen is hygienic and she passes on a behavior where the workers will actually bite the mites off of the other bees or off of themselves. I haven't heard much about it recently, but it's a couple years old that they've been working on these bees. But a more hygienic queen can have workers who are more preoccupied with cleaning or better at cleaning cells or something like that. Where was I here? American foul brood, like I said before, this is where you would burn all of your equipment, get rid of your frames. Several years ago, there were actually people who would come and inspect all of your hives and make sure that the hives were free of American foul brood. We've done a good enough job that we no longer have your state or your federal beehive inspectors. So it's not something that you see all the time. It's something you should be aware of and something that you should kind of know about. But I don't want to scare anybody here. It's not very common these days. I believe I have seen one case of European foul brood, but it was so close that it could have just been mites. It was at the right time of year, and I was seeing the right signs that it could have just been a really heavy mite infestation. There are treatments for American foul brood. So it's not recommended, but if you have American foul brood, you can basically give the bees chemotherapy from a licensed vet only. I have never tried this before. I've never actually even seen American foul brood myself, but it seems like it's a possibility that you can pull them through it. But this is a large reason why when you hear in the beekeeping communities, when you're starting up a new hive, don't get any used equipment, because if someone has American foul brood, they didn't go through the proper incineration, they're giving you this equipment, and even if it hasn't been used in 10 years, you put a new colony in there, it's going to get American foul brood and die. That's it. Okay. My computer was complaining, apparently it wasn't plugged in all the way. Diseases, so I've got a photo here actually of deformed wing virus. And it shows just how obvious it is. There are different levels of infection for deformed wing virus. This is a pretty bad one, but sometimes you just see kind of crumpled wings. They almost look normal, but they still can't fly. This bee has a significantly shortened lifespan and won't really be helpful in the colony. It's also pretty easy to spread deformed wing virus, so most of the workers will kick them out. Like I said before, though, it is a red flag. If you're seeing this, there's something else going on in the colony. Deformed wing virus doesn't usually appear alone. Nosema and dysentery, the adult diseases. The only way to test for nosema to be absolutely sure you have it is to dissect the bee. So if you're looking at the intestines of a normal bee and a bee with nosema, you'll be able to tell just how swollen it is just as a visual inspection by cutting open the abdomen. But externally, you can tell that you have problems with either nosema or dysentery because they look very similar. By seeing fecal streaking on the front of the hive. Normally bees will get nosema or dysentery over winter when it's been very rainy and they've had very few opportunities to leave the hive on cleansing flights. If you held it all winter long and you weren't a bear, you wouldn't feel very good either. I don't imagine the bears even feel very good. So in order to prevent nosema and dysentery, I always add extra ventilation to my hives. And it's a good idea to have a rain cover over the top. So you've got your telescoping cover, which is your normal top. Doesn't really give them a flyaway. Put a piece of plywood or some sort of scrap metal or something on top of the hive to give them about 12 inches or so of extra flyaway. So even in the rain, they can come out, they can take a cleansing flight, use the bathroom, go back into the hive. And that's really going to help out with hygiene and tummy problems. If you still see problems with nosema and dysentery after winter has stopped, it's in the colony, it's spreading, hygienic cleans can help. So re-cleaning, that will not only produce a brood break, you're going to have a little period where you're not going to have any brood, then you're going to have your new queen laying brand new larva who will be slightly more hygienic. You're going to, like I said before, make sure you feed them properly, make sure they've got supplemental feed, maybe some extra additives in their food like Pro Health, and that should fix up the problem for you. If your hive has too much shade, this can be a problem too. Varroa destructor. This is probably why most of you have been taking this class in the first place. It is the single largest problem beekeepers today face. It's a worldwide pandemic at this point. If you have a colony of bees, you also have a colony of Varroa destructor. There's almost no getting around it. Learning to spot mites can be difficult because they're about the size of a penhead. As you can see on this mite board, this is a mite board for a 10-frame colony. There is one mite on this entire board, and it's difficult to spot. There are a couple of tricks for spotting them. As you can see, this mite board is pretty clean. If you leave your mite board in year round, you're never going to be able to see anything. So make sure when you go to test for mites, you put in a very clean white mite board. It can be made of anything. I use Corex for mine. As long as you have a surface that's not going to be thrown off by the wind, spray a bit of Pam cooking spray on here, use a sticky mite board, just put something clean and white in your bottom cover here. Leave it in for about 3 days. That's how long this one was in, it's about 3 days. When you need a screen over. Nope, you're putting it inside your screen bottom board. So this is going directly below the screen that's already there. You can kind of see where the frames are. These little white patches where there's not much, that's where the frames are. And in between the frames, you're going to see lots of just little debris. You'll see pieces of pollen. You'll see pieces of wax cappings from when brood are hatching out, all sorts of things like that. And you may see some dead bees as well, or some ants or earwigs, all sorts of things on this board. But when you're looking for the mites, it can be handy to use a flashlight. It can be handy to use a hand lens. And it's also handy to know that everything on this board is matte except for the mites. The mites are shiny. So that really helps out. Have a flashlight, a hand lens, and look for the shiny things. This bottom photo here is a photo of a varroa mite from the top. Okay, we are back. So I was saying that the varroa mites are matte or are shiny. Everything else on your mite board is going to be matte, so that'll make it a little bit easier to tell. Use your flashlight, use your hand lens. After about 3 days, you should be looking for probably 3 mites. If you see 3 mites, that's when you know you should be treating. It's a lot easier to knock down a small population of varroa mites than to knock down a high population of varroa mites. And it's a lot easier to find a small population of varroa mites in spring than in summer. So you're using your mite board to test, you're using your drone testing, and you're using your alcohol wash. The drone testing, like I said, the May edition of American Bee Journal, the article by Zach Lamas kind of goes over his methods of testing for drones. I tried it a little while ago, and all I did is while I was doing my hive inspection, every time I'd see a drone, I'd pluck the drone, visually inspect the drone, throw him over my shoulder. That way I know he's still alive, he's doing his thing, but he's not going to be the same drone I'm going to pick up in 5 minutes. So you're looking for about 40 drones. Honestly, nobody's going to look for 40 drones and pick out 40 drones. I plucked out 20 drones, and I basically called that for mine. I did find 1 varroa mite, and so that's when I treated. But your varroa mites in early spring are all going to be super concentrated on your drones. In the late summer, when you have a significantly lower population or no population of drones, you're going to be doing your regular alcohol washes, your mite boards, things like that. And your mite boards should still be fairly accurate even in the springtime, because you're getting the drop from the entire colony, not just your nurseries. It's good to employ a variety of treatment strategies to reduce your mite populations. I dislike the chemical miticides like Apivar and things like that, because mites can build up a resistance to these medications. So I try and go with naturally derived mite controls. I carry Apiguard here in the store, HopGuard. Trouble with HopGuard is it's better for sideline beekeepers. You have to buy it in obscene amounts. And Formic Pro, which is my favorite.
And all of these are okay as far as you can utilize the honey, but it just doesn't taste right.
You shouldn't be using most of these during honey flow.
Right.
So if you have your honey super on, I really hate saying this, but the FDA has technically approved the use of formic acid on honeybee colony with a honey super on. So you can use it during honey flow. I don't recommend it. I haven't read the report, but I think it's a little silly. If you're going to be treating for mites, try not to have your honey super on. Everything else, definitely don't have your honey super on. But try not to treat when your honey supers are on, if at all possible. Your honey supers really should only be on June and July. So that 2-month period, no treatment, that's no trouble at all.
So if we went out to treat them tomorrow with Formic Pro, how long before we put on supers?
The moment you remove the Formic Pro, it's a fumigant, and it comes in kind of a fumigant patty with papers on the outside. You leave the papers on the outside of the fumigant patty, and that keeps it moist for a little bit longer. It keeps it going, and it also keeps it as a slow release because it's a strong medication. You pull those off and you can really be in trouble. Usually, depending on conditions in your area, the patty is dried to a cake within probably 4 to 5 days. The medication is going to tell you to leave it on for 10 days, but usually you can take it out a little bit before that.
So it dries up, you take it out.
Yes, once
And
it's
then
dried
you
into
put
a
your
cake,
sugar on.
it's, yes.
And where do you put it?
You would put it in the exact same location on the opposite of your protein patty. So you put your protein patty directly on top of your frames
Yep.
on the front or the back of the hive. Put the formic acid on the opposite side.
Okay.
Don't feed and treat at the same time. If you have a protein patty on, it's been there for a while, it's okay to leave it. But don't feed and treat at the same time, because that's going to eradicate all interest in the brand new protein patty, because it's just gonna smell like formic acid.
Is there other forms of formic acid like? Or?
There are other forms of formic acid. I think Mitaway Crick strips is probably the most common. And it's basically the same thing, but in different concentration. The Formic Pro is the newer version and the more concentrated version of the medication. It's
A friend of mine, he's got something that. This formic acid in there.
you might be talking about oxalic acid.
Maybe that's it.
Oxalic acid is another effective treatment, but it's only effective at certain times of year.
Yeah.
Hopguard, Apiguard, and oxalic acid all share the same trait where they won't get through wax cappings. So when you treat with these medications, you're not treating capped brood, which means you're going to have to treat again at a different time. That's the reason I like Formic Pro so much, is because Formic Pro will penetrate your wax cappings. It's a one and done treatment. For small colonies, it's good to note that formic acid is a very strong medication. The instructions on the back are going to tell you how to treat a full size colony, 60,000 strong, 2 brood boxes. When you have a nuke, you've only got a couple of frames, you've got a half size colony. So cut that treatment in half and only do a half a dose. Because it is
Even
strong.
if you put the second brood box on, you
Yes.
still would have the same amount of bees.
Mhm.
Okay.
If you've got 10 frames of bees, you can go ahead and do the full dose. I'd recommend doing the full dose over the course of 2 weeks so you don't release it too quickly. But if you've got 6 or 7 frames of bees, use the half dose, because it is strong enough. It could cause brood interruptions, it could cause brood death, it could even cause queen death. So you've got to be careful with it. Temperature parameters, I think, are right over here somewhere. Yes, we're coming up on it, but temperature parameters are very important when you're using these medications as well. So beekeepers are basically meteorologists too. Use a variety of treatments and practices to limit varroa. I've got a photo of a phoretic mite up here. Phoretic mites are simply mites on adult honeybees, versus most varroa mites are found on brood. It's a little difficult to see phoretic varroa mites. This is kind of an odd positioning on this bee up here. You can see it's actually on her thorax. Most of the time when varroa are on adult bees, they're on the underplates. So you won't really see them. They're on the underside of the bee. So good feeding, including supplements like Pro Health or Honeybee Healthy. Healthy bees are less likely to be so adversely affected by varroa. Drone frames to reduce mite population. Again, timing is paramount. You have to remove the drone frame, scrape the drone, put it back into the hive before the drone hatch. Effective monitoring, hive inspection, looking for your physical signs of phoretic mites or deformed wing virus. Mite boards to check for mites, phoretic bee sampling, like your drone sampling, alcohol washes. This is all part of testing for mites, looking at the colony health and seeing when you need to treat. As far as loose guidelines for mite treatments, I tend not to treat my colonies in wintertime because I don't use oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is effective, but it's expensive and it's a little bit dangerous. You do need proper PPE in order to apply it, especially if you're doing the fumigation of oxalic acid versus the dribble method. There are a lot of really friendly beekeepers at Lynn Benton Beekeepers Association who know a lot more about oxalic acid than I do, and they have kits there, and they'd be happy to help you with oxalic acid during wintertime. But we're going to deal with just your in-season treatments here.
Question.
Mhm.
With the mite boards, that goes in with a screen bottom board. should you have a board in there the rest of the time, or can you leave that open?
That's a good question. So the question is, when you have a screen bottom board with a mite board, should you leave the screen bottom board capped? Or should you allow it to be ventilated throughout the year or at any time of year? And this is one of those questions where you're gonna get a lot of different answers. My personal opinion, ventilation is absolute key in the boxes that we have, the wooden Langstroth boxes. They need that extra ventilation. They really collect the moisture, and the moisture around this area really kills the colonies over winter. So extra ventilation is key. We get really warm, wet winters typically. So I leave the mite board out unless I'm testing for mites. Everything is ventilated. Everything has plenty of circulation in there. But here's a great example here. You asked Billy Caron, and I talked to him in person. Ventilation is not always the key, and Hives, he runs the honeybee loss survey for the Pacific Northwest. He says far and away, the statistics say that if you cover your screen bottom board in wintertime, you have better survivability. I have not seen this in my hives, and we have a difference of opinion. So I go all ventilation, and he goes all insulation in wintertime.
Do you live in the Northwest?
Sorry.
Is he in the Northwest?
I was gonna say it's confusing because they don't wanna be cold
They're very good at regulating their own temperature, though.
and not as good at regulating the moisture.
Not as good at regulating moisture. The problem with a lot of our hives is the moisture is generated when the bees are shivering to keep warm. So the moisture rises, collects on the top of the cover, forms droplets, and goes right back down onto the colony. We have flat covers, which is a problem. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll tilt my hive. So say the entrance is right here, I'll tilt my hive a little bit in the wintertime. So when the moisture goes up to that top board, it falls to the forward and goes out the entrance instead of dropping down on the colony. And this isn't a huge tilt, this is just a tiny tilt. If you tilt too much in any direction, you're gonna have the bees drawing your frames all funny, and it's gonna be a mess. There are certain covers that have kind of dome covers as well, and that'll also help the droplets go on the side of the colony instead of directly onto the cluster. So in a roundabout way, did that answer your question? Okay. Let's see. So mite treatments, loose guidelines for active season treatment. So after installation of a new hive, or as temperature allows for overwintered colony, is your first treatment. So this could be, let's say you're treating with Apigard. It's going to be when temperatures are 60 degrees, daytime temperatures for 3 days in a row. Not going to be super early, but as early as you can get those temperatures, you're going to be treating. Directly after honey harvest is the next time you would treat. So this would be probably August 1st through 15th is the window we're aiming for here. I try not to harvest my honey too late because I want my bees to be able to go out and forage and bring enough honey in that they can make it through the winter as well. So the last week of July is when I do my harvest. And
you just said you don't want to be too late and you want them to come back and repopulate their stores. But earlier you said you would never take honey from the brood box. So you're saying then that you're leaving the supers up there for them to repopulate to the extent they can for winter.
My honey super, I take my honey super, I put the honey super back on for them to clean it up, and then that honey super for the rest of the winter is theirs.
Okay.
So their honey frames are great for centrifuge if you're harvesting the liquid honey, but if you're doing cut comb honey, you would replace the frames every year.
Okay.
So same box, different frames, basically.
Thanks.
You treat again right after honey harvest, like I was saying, and then right before winter sets in. So you'll treat the August 1st through 15th, and then you'll do another mite check and see where the mite population is, probably September, October. It's kind of a funny window in there because you want to get the treatment in as late as possible, but you don't want to miss your window. You don't want the rains to start because you can't treat. So as late as possible. And what I've been seeing over the last couple of years is the mite populations are fine right after honey harvest. You might see a couple mites here or there, you'll treat, and you'll think, oh, well, I barely even needed to treat. You test again in September and they have exploded. Last year we had 0 mites in early August. We had 30 mites on a mite board
Oh,
in September, and we did a full dose of formic acid. And we were able to save one of the hives that had been affected that badly, but the populations jump really fast. So it's really important to keep up on it. And that is the main cause of death in your honeybee colonies over winter.
So can you read, like, if I clean the mite board really well, I can keep using the same mite board. I don't
Oh,
have to keep using
The sticky mite boards, the actual stickies, it's a one and done. It's more for if you're sending them into OSU or something. But if you got your Corex boards, you can just clean them off and use them again and again. That's why I like them. They're cheap and they're reusable. Before rain sets in, the oxalic acid I went over briefly. It's not too much I know about it, so I'm just kind of skimming over here. Managing varroa mites. Quite the topic here. So feeding your sugar syrup and protein to make up for dearth of natural resources in mid to late summer. This helps your bees to be healthy, and healthy bees are more able to fend off diseases sent over by varroa mites. Supplements such as Pro Health, Honeybee Healthy, things like that. I've got one picture up here in the corner. They have shown some benefits in some situations. There's not a whole lot of literature out there. Some beekeepers swear by it. Some beekeepers say it makes no difference at all. It can help to actually make your sugar syrup last longer too, though. So it'll prevent it from molding so fast. So there's that at least. Controlling mites after installation, before honey flow, after honey flow, and before winter cluster forms. Keeping up on your integrated pest management is basically the only thing you can really do to combat these mites, aside from just healthy practices. It's good to alternate your mite treatments to reduce your risk of resistance, but the temperature conditions are very important. If you treat with formic acid on a 100-degree day, where it's going to be 100 degrees for 3 days, you're going to kill your colony. So you've really got to be careful. The temperature parameters are usually listed on the medication or on the instructions for the medication on the back. If they're not, just keep in mind it's probably somewhere between 50 degrees and 80 degrees. Apigard is one of those medications where you can use it in late summer because you can use it up to 105 degrees. It's not a fumigant, it's a gel, which is why you can use it in such high temperatures. I wouldn't use it if it's above probably 95.
So Apigard and Thymol are the same.
Yes. Thymol comes from the thyme plant and is the main ingredient in Apigard. Formic acid, because it's so strong and it is a fumigant, it has a much lower temperature range. You want to be using it. You can use it with lower temperatures, 50 degrees, but you can't use it above 84 degrees, or you'll risk all sorts of problems in your honeybee colony. Hop beta acids or hop guard, the hop strips, 50 to 92 degrees. Some people say you can use them in midwinter, and there really isn't a low temperature parameter. Their website does say 50 to 92 degrees though. And then oxalic acid, you can use it as long as you can get into the hive. As far as the dribble method, as far as the fumigation method, you can use it in the dead of winter, 20 minus. But it's only effective in a broodless condition. So it's wonderfully effective. You've got no brood, you use oxalic acid, you wipe out all the mites. But if you've got brood, it doesn't affect the cap brood. The website down here that I've got listed, it just takes you to our YouTube page, and I've got a video of myself installing both Apigard and formic acid into 2 different hives on site. So if you've got questions about how to apply, what it should look like, where to apply it, that kind of thing, it's just a 3-minute video. It's easier to show than to tell here. So learning to read your hive and conducting consistent inspections will reduce your losses, your frustrations, and increase your confidence. Trying to conduct regular bi-weekly inspections it's going to help you with swarm prevention. It's going to help you know the changes that are happening in your colony as they're happening. you'll know your bees better, you'll know how to help them better. And it's always good to take notes because you think, oh, well, definitely remember I did that last Tuesday. There's so much going on in a honeybee colony, and there's so many things that you may never have seen before, or maybe you've seen 100 times before, but you need to take note. Just take a quick little thing. I've got my notebook here, and everybody's got something different, but I've got it marked with all sorts of different things. I've got hive configurations in here. I've got hive names. I've got what the weather was, what I did, what I saw, how many frames of brood there were, just random things that I can look at later. So it's always helpful. It's also a nice cool down after you've been out there for 20 minutes in a bee suit in a 100-degree day. A lot of the issues that would affect your colony are also going to affect other colonies nearby with a typical range of 3 miles. It's pretty unlikely you're going to be the only colony in the area. So taking care of your bees is also taking care of everyone else's bees. I do offer in-hive consultations. They're $85 within a 10-mile range of the store. I say 1 hour. If it hits 2 hours, I do have to charge twice, but usually it's 1 hour and 50 minutes. So you guys know how much I like to talk. I try and keep it short, and it never really works. But I'm always available via email. You can catch me at the store via phone, or you can just pop in person. And the only days I'm not here are Mondays and Tuesdays. So I'm always happy to talk to everybody. So at this point, I'd like to invite everybody to unmute themselves, ask some questions, let me know if there's anything that I didn't get to. Anybody here have any questions as well?
I still haven't figured out when to put my super on.
Okay.
So individual question, not for everybody.
It's something that I can't tell you exactly when to do unless you really see the hive. So you got a nuke. It was last week, week and a half ago? Week and a half. Okay. How many frames have they filled out?
Because of the skunk.
Because of the
I think they are, I mean, I'm gonna look again today, but they'd only gone up and made a comb at the top
Okay.
where the sugar water was. And so I scraped that off, put it back on, and I haven't looked since.
Gotcha.
4 days.
So depending on how much damage the skunk did, I probably wouldn't put a honey super on. What you're trying to get them to do this year is to fill out their bottom brood box and to fill out a brood box on top. And you want to get those 2 brood boxes as full as you can before winter, and just let them go through with those 2 brood boxes.
So it's really doing mites.
So you're looking at mites, you're looking at filling the brood boxes, and it's likely you won't even put a honey super on it all this year.
Okay.
Basically with mites then, should we look for mites or should we actually treat for mites right now?
It's a great idea to look for mites before and after treatment so you know how effective they have been. Every now and then you get a treatment that's not effective and you have to treat again. Usually you can tell while you're treating. Be careful when you're doing this. Don't do this, and I'll just tell you that I did it. When you're using formic acid and you're using your chemical resistant gloves, just kind of take a little bit of a whiff of it. And if your nose hairs burn out, you know it's good.
Chemical resistant gloves, not my regular bee gloves.
Heavy leather gloves or chemical resistant gloves are recommended. So if you take a good whiff of formic acid, it'll send you straight through a barbed wire fence. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's not good.
But if you catch a whiff of it from out here, you know it's still good. I have had an expired batch of formic acid before, and it was my first time applying it, so I didn't know any better. I'm like, oh, cool, what's this stuff? I'm holding it up here. Fred looks over and he's like, what are you doing? I don't know, I'm checking it out. I was like, throw that away. If you're putting it that close to your nose, it's not gonna work. So I found out real fast that that's not what formic acid is supposed to be.
So I have these 2 colonies, and in one, when I took my formic pearl off, this treatment that I just did, hard, kind of crispy, tossed it, no problem. The other one, still very strong, and I put them on at the same time, and it seems identical hives.
Okay.
The other one, still pretty pliable, although you could tell some of it had gone away, but still very strong formic acid
Interesting.
smell. Yeah, I'm just.
How long was that you took them out?
Pardon?
How long were they in there?
They were in there for at least a full 10 days.
Okay,
Like, I'm old, so it's like, I think it's 2 weeks and it's 4 days, and sometimes I think it's 3 days and it's 4 weeks.
Mhm.
So, but no, I'm sure it was 10 days,
Okay.
it might have been 14.
it should be dried out into a cake by then. They don't like the smell and they'll try and dry it out with their wings too. Was it a weaker colony or a stronger colony?
Well, both colonies seem strong, but that's the colony where now I think I saw chalk brood, which I thought was,
Hmm.
well, maybe it's just a word for pollen, because I've never seen anything before.
It could have to do with the moisture content in the hive too. If you're looking at chalk brood and you're looking at a formic acid patty that's not drying, you could have moisture problems in there, or ventilation problems.
Oh, it's more questions later about that.
All right, I think I've yapped at everybody long enough. I'm gonna shut down the Zoom portion now. Thanks for everybody for joining and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hey,
Very good.